just wanna.
Can you see myself? Can you see myself? Can you see myself?
On Earth, they can generate winds of over 200 miles per hour, vast quantities of rain, and deadly walls of water. To experience a hurricane is to change your life. These huge storms are born at sea. For a ship's crew, a hurricane is the worst nightmare. But a hurricane really makes its mark when it hits land. Even a moderate-sized hurricane produces the energy equivalent to 8,000 one-megaton bombs. On average, 50 of these killer storms are spawned every year. About 1/3 make landfall. Most people prepare for high winds, but 90% of those who are killed die from drowning. Hurricane Pauline was the worst hurricane that North or South America had experienced for more than 40 years. 400 people died from drowning. It struck near the Mexican resort of Acapulco. The coast is packed with high-rise, concrete hotels, and the resort is famous for its golden beaches and clear, warm seas. Hurricane Pauline unleashed its fury in October '97, with winds of up to 130 miles per hour. The hurricane missed Acapulco itself, but unleashed torrential rains on the surrounding mountains. "16 inches of rain fell in less than 24 hours. Tons of rainwater rushed down as flash floods.
It was like an electric storm, that's how it started. And finally the rain began pouring down, and Lord, what heavy rain. You couldn't walk the streets anymore. It was dangerous to cross because the water was sweeping along stones and rocks. And if one of those rocks had hit you on the foot, it would have broken it, and you would have fallen down, and the current would have washed you away. That's what happened to some people. It was even dragging along cars.
Aid workers were sent in to help the victims. One of the first to survey the damage was Ron Wormser.
I think the thing that surprised me about the damage was that it did not come from the ocean side. But the hurricane, because of the pattern and the wind swirling, the damage actually came down as the water fell on the foothills, flooded the rivers and streams, and then washed downstream. That's what really washed things out and caused all the damage.
The morning after Pauline hit, all the water and all the sand came down these streets, filled up this roundabout with sand 6 feet high, washed away that video store. No cars could come along. Everything was covered with sand.
One local captured on video the moment when a river overflowed this bridge. Within hours, the whole area was completely submerged. Deadly torrents of water turned the glamorous resort into a bewildering mess of muddy streets and ruined cars.
When I woke up in the morning, well, I saw what happened. I was in shock. So I went to walk the streets, and the streets were full of sand. There was a lot of water. There was a lot of confusion. Nobody knew what to do. We saw a lot of people in shock walking. We walked and we saw and we didn't like what we see. We were in denial.
It was difficult for the locals to come to terms with their tragedy. Disease and mud were everywhere. The clear-up operation lasted months. Bodies were scattered everywhere, over 400. Many of them were found down by the coast.
The bodies of the people who were found near here were people who lived in the sides of the hill in the mountains. They were washed away by the force of the water and they were brought all the way to this place.
The rivers were so full that they were spewing the bodies of dead people onto the banks. There were bodies everywhere, all of them already dead. Usually naked because the water takes everything away.
For the relief workers, it was a harrowing experience.
Well, when we got there, we saw that the coastline that would normally be green and lush like most tropical coastlines were just stripped of their leaves, denuded, all the trees, that it was just brown and dead and dry, that you could see patterns in the ground where the trees had been laid down by the winds, and saw power poles, power structures blown off their foundations and power lines laying down. We saw bridges washed out. We saw just a lot of roofs missing from houses. So we saw quite a bit of damage.
Mountain villages were smashed by the storm. These poorly constructed houses couldn't withstand the power of a hurricane. Many of the villagers lost everything they owned. Here, there was no warning of Hurricane Pauline.
We were all sleeping. Everybody around here was sleeping. We weren't expecting anything like a hurricane. At about 2 a.m. we heard this terrible noise because the water was dragging along rocks and everything, and it was so loud that the earth was shaking.
Huge boulders brought down by the force of the water blocked the path of the river and diverted it through the houses.
I woke up my husband and told him that we should get out because the water was already by the front door. And we woke up our daughters, and as soon as we were away from the house, a violent flood of water came, and the next minute the house was full of water. It destroyed everything, the clothes and everything.
The water covered my house up to the top and it filled it up with mud and sludge, stones up to the roof. It destroyed all our belongings.
50 villages disappeared completely. Many of the dead were buried under the rocks and mud. Thousands of villagers were left homeless.
I think that for them it's doubly sad because they are people who are really just barely getting by to begin with. And then to be hit with the force of nature like this, to lose their livelihood, to lose their food supply, it's got to be a very devastating experience. Their whole lives really became altered by the course of the storm.
It's been difficult for the villagers to rebuild their shattered lives and homes. Now they're much more aware of their precarious location up in the mountains.
As we'd never seen it before, we weren't cautious enough. We were too confident that nothing major would happen. But now, we're scared when there's a little breeze, a little bit of rain.
The Mexican government has now established an evacuation plan for these villages. Next time a hurricane drives through the hills, there will be sirens and official shelters. But without enough warning, these will be useless. Hurricanes form over the oceans near the equator. Their destructive winds can affect an area up to 1,000 miles wide. Inside the eye of the storm, a column of clear air up to 40 miles across, there is relative calm. Hurricanes develop when huge volumes of water evaporate from warm tropical oceans. The rotation of the Earth intensifies the storm. When the wind rises above 74 miles per hour, a hurricane is born. Hurricane is the name for a storm when it forms over the Atlantic or Eastern Pacific. But in the Indian Ocean and off Australia, they are referred to as cyclones. And north of the equator, in the West Pacific, they're called typhoons. Typhoons form 3 times more often than cyclones or hurricanes. They are also more destructive. The Western Pacific is the most active region on Earth, with an average of 21 typhoons every year. Over this huge ocean, typhoons have weeks to build up their strength. When they hit land, they are extremely destructive. The island of Guam is only 30 miles long. It's struck by a typhoon on average once every 5 years. It's a danger the islanders have learned to live with.
Tick-tock, here goes the swinging clock.
When Typhoon Paka hit, just before Christmas of '97, Doug Kemmis was working off the island. Cindy Kemmis and her children had to face the threat alone.
I really started to feel nervous when I first saw the satellite pictures on TV. I got those large, swirling typhoon heading right for the island. It was clearly a direct hit. I mean, it was like a gun was aimed at us with a cannonball in the gun, you know. And all of a sudden, you get this totally sinking sensation in the pit of your stomach, and you realize there is nowhere to go, and there is no bridge off of this island. And besides, you're stuck, you know. And then you feel some terror inside because you realize there's no way to get away.
Cindy kept the children downstairs away from the windows in the center of the house.
Here are the children in their little abode. You like this, Ariana?
When the children were settled, she began recording the storm.
Not exactly a peaceful playground.
I just realized this was a once-in-a-lifetime thing, and you could either shiver in the corner or you could just try to appreciate the magnificence of the whole thing.
This is absolutely nowhere near as strong as this is supposed to get.
Typhoon Paka started near Hawaii. By the time it reached Guam, with winds over 145 miles per hour, it was classified as a super typhoon. Meteorologist Bill Ward also recorded the progress of the storm.
Well, it was the very first super typhoon that I'd ever been in, so I was very interested to see exactly what a super typhoon was. You could see this, you know, just columns of rain coming by, and also the wind, it was reverberating constantly. It sounded almost like a train running across on tracks. It's something I'd never heard before. Wow! And I continued to stay there and film until the winds got so strong that I'm like, you know, wait, you know, this is getting a little wild here. I've got to start getting out of here because I'm starting to hear branches breaking right here in my backyard, and I'm beginning to believe that, you know, this is no longer safe for me to stay here. So I started making my way back to the door, which was very difficult because the winds were almost pushing me against the house. By the time I got to the door, I'd gotten my wife to try to help me get the door because I couldn't open it myself. She was pushing out and I was pulling on it, and it's just like, this is impossible. And the more I thought about what was happening, it's like, God, if that door breaks off or swings out, the house is going to be devastated.
Bill finally got inside through a door on the opposite side of the house, but even then, he didn't feel safe.
The glass was reverberating. It's just like pressing out and back and forth. And at first I was like, wow, this is really cool. Then I'm like, no, it ain't. This could actually break and throw glass into the house. So I made sure that both my wife and I got away from the doors and windows.
Not everyone was intimidated by Typhoon Paka. This is Barbara White, a storm chaser who positively enjoys being in the heart of the storm.
What I really love about hurricanes and typhoons is the high wind. I really love high wind. I love the feel of it blowing at me, and I also like the excitement of seeing exactly what it does. To me, it's pure ecstasy. I really love being in storms. There isn't anything on earth that I'd rather be doing than being in a typhoon.
That was about 140 easy.
I know. I know they're dangerous, but for some reason, once the wind starts to pick up, it's like my mind is hypnotized and I don't even feel any kind of danger. And I take more risks than I probably should because of that. Woo! What a gust!
Barbara has lived on Guam for 15 years and has experienced over 30 typhoons.
We went and checked out how the storm surge might be coming along, because oftentimes when a storm's approaching, the water will come over the road and wash out the roadway. Now this is how I like to see water surging in. The waves were big enough to bring the water up, and it almost washed me out a couple of times. I had to turn around and run at one point so I didn't submerge the camera in water.
Typhoon Paka raged over Guam for 12 hours. Winds gusted up to 200 miles per hour.
This is Eyewall City. The wind just started picking up dramatically. It went from just 40-mile-an-hour gale force up to topping over 100, 130 miles an hour within about an hour period of time. Woo! When you have a typhoon or a hurricane hit, everything stops, no matter what is going on. Everybody's life has to come to a standstill for a temporary period of time. It shows the humans of the earth their own vulnerability. It shows them that there is something stronger than them.
At the climax of the typhoon, even Barbara White had to take cover.
The rain was just so blinding, I couldn't even see where I was going. I couldn't see the curb of the road or anything, or where there was a driveway to turn, and the flooding was starting to get heavier. By this time, the wind was starting to gust up to 200 miles an hour, so the car had almost flipped over, and I thought I better get to that building to ride out the eye wall, so I headed up to the Shell gas station.
Oh, man.
Whoa! Just the power of nature itself really impresses me.
Yep, a lot of wind, huh? So I better shut the door now, but...
It's funny, you feel all safe and like you've got everything under control and stuff, and then all of a sudden you realize Mother Nature is the one with it under control. The sound of the wind is very eerie. You know, it kind of gets to you. It's like someone screaming and screaming for attention, you know. The thing you want to do is open the door and say, be quiet, you know. And you can't help but be frightened and feel like things are beyond your control.
bedded down in the kitchen.
It's scary.
You think it's scary?
It's scary to me too.
Why do you think it's scary?
It's windy, it's very windy, and we can't go out there.
These guys are really brave with all this ruckus. The typhoon's hitting this side of the house now. You can hear it knocking at the door. And some water coming in under all the doors and windows and stuff.
150,000 people live on Guam. 5,000 homes were destroyed. There was more than $500 million worth of damage. It was a miracle that no one was killed.
So what do you think about that, guys?
Wow.
Cindy's house survived Paka. She was one of the lucky ones.
I realized that this is probably one of the best built developments on the island, and it looked like the hand of God came down on it. And then you're realizing, hey, these were concrete houses. You know, what happened to all the rest of the people that aren't fortunate enough to live in concrete houses? And then you feel sick, absolutely sick, because you realize that there are a lot of people out there that aren't going, oh, the trees, oh, the flowers. They're going, oh my God, you know, my home, my possessions.
As soon as it was safe, Cindy and her children ventured out to see the damage.
Go.
Her 8-year-old son, Austin, recorded the devastation with their camcorder.
Got it recording?
Yep.
Okay, we're going over to Perez Acres.
Wow.
Going over, Dolly. Get that, Austin?
Quite a lot of things got damaged.
Yeah.
Anything tin got either blown away or very badly damaged.
It's right through here. Look at this. See that? Look at the power of the wind right there.
I felt kind of sorry for the people that got their houses destroyed and all their belongings scattered all over the island. Yeah. Just saw all the broken buildings and pillars with no roofs and no walls, and it was pretty amazing. Power lines are down.
There was a lot of tin all over because that's, of course, a major roofing material on the island. And it wasn't just like a sheet of tin laying here. It was a sheet of tin wrapped around the stump of a bedraggled tree.
Some people lost everything they owned in a single night. Fortunately, Captain Wheeler and his family weren't home when Paka hit. It completely destroyed their house and belongings.
We saw the house was here, except that the garage was gone, but the cars were there. And once I entered this door right here, which led to a big hallway, as soon as I entered the door, I saw the most beautiful panoramic view of the earth. The whole house was gone except for that wall.
The house had stood here since 1944, but the extreme force of Typhoon Paka proved too much for it.
I was heartbroken. I just couldn't believe that everything had gone that quickly. My two daughters were absolutely destroyed when they saw their rooms totally gone, and the only thing left was a bed in the middle of the room, and all the linen had been blown off the beds. My wife, of course, was devastated because all the things that are important to us were either gone or underwater. We salvaged what we could, but that's about all we could do. What can you say when your whole life suddenly in the space of an hour or two is just all gone?
It has made me realize the power of nature. When you actually see nature come in and take all the things that people have so carefully constructed and feel so safe in, and you see nature just come in and within a few hours just decimate that. It just makes you realize, you know, you do the best you can with what you have and you appreciate what you have, because tomorrow, with nature involved, you may very well not have it anymore.
The worst damage is not caused by the wind, but by the sea. Typhoons and hurricanes push a huge mass of ocean ahead of them. This is called a storm surge. The sea can rise by as much as 40 feet. Impossible conditions for a human to survive. During a hurricane, the sea is at its most dangerous. This ferry with 200 passengers survived hurricane-force winds and 20-foot waves.
Hurricanes are extremely intense and very dangerous. They're probably the worst operating condition that you could think of. There are other threats that are very dangerous for mariners at sea, but there's probably none that are as dangerous as a hurricane.
There's no ships that can withstand hurricane force seas and winds without sustaining some kind of damage. So the best possible scenario is to avoid the storm at all costs.
But 2 years ago, Coast Guard David Lee found himself stranded on a cutter in the middle of a hurricane. The crew had to endure 25-foot waves for 12 hours.
It's like a large washing machine out in the ocean. We didn't know where the seas were coming from. They would either break on our sides, our stern, our bow, and we were just fighting them off. At the same time, we had 6 members on the boat seasick, and that made the situations even worse.
It was almost impossible to hold on to the wheel.
Myself and another boatswain mate took turns driving all day long, and after the day was over, we were both just bruised from shoulders to knees from just getting tossed around. The seas were just incredible. I'd never seen it that large in my entire life.
The worst place to be caught in a hurricane is inside a harbor.
Safe harbor is not really safe harbor during a hurricane. Safe harbor is actually getting in a car and driving inland 90 to 100 miles.
Busan Harbor is the largest port in South Korea. For 2,000 years, ships have docked here. During Typhoon Faye in 1995, ships caught inside the port were smashed against the rocks. Many of the crews were lucky to escape with their lives. This ship was evacuated just seconds before it flipped and sank. Typhoon Faye left 17 people dead and 25 missing. 235 ships were destroyed. 2 years earlier, another typhoon hit Busan Harbor. This freighter broke loose from its moorings, with its crew still on board. Lashed by the relentless winds, it smashed against the shore and began to sink. 2 of the men were caught by a giant wave. One of them managed to hang on to the side, but the other was washed out towards the rocks. One was lucky. The other was never found. People who live on small islands are at the greatest risk from a storm surge. Isolated right in the middle of the South Pacific, Manahiki is one of the most beautiful of the Cook Islands. It's made up of 40 tiny islands which surround a 2.5-mile wide lagoon. Most of the 700 islanders are black pearl fishermen. Their lives were shattered by a cyclone in just a matter of hours. Bruce and Louise Graham retired to Manahiki from New Zealand.
We unfortunately did not take it too seriously.
99 times out of 100, they head south. But this rascal called Martin, he decided he'll come north, and we didn't really think it was going to come.
In November 1997, as Cyclone Martin approached Manahiki, 96-mile-per-hour winds whipped up the sea into lethal, destructive waves. There was no warning, so the islanders were completely unaware of the danger.
It was a rainy day, it was cool, but the winds were not at such a force to give us concern. So we just carried on whatever we were doing.
The entire island is only a few feet above sea level. As the cyclone approached, the sea began to rise. It was only then that the islanders realized they were trapped.
The current and the wind at night could have been 100 knots. I saw boats spinning like a propeller. And these are 16-foot aluminium boats with outboards on it. And it's spinning just like a propeller.
The combined power of wind and waves pounded the tiny atoll.
The houses on the ocean side of the island had been demolished, but we didn't think, because we were in the middle of the island, that it would reach us. At about 4, we had a really big wave, and the floating debris made holes in the wall. And that was the time when I said to Bruce, Hal, let's get out of here. And we were walking fairly quickly when Bruce said to me, run, there's a big wave coming, so I ran.
My old heart was going like hell, and I think I aged about 10 years.
A massive 30-foot storm surge smashed through homes.
We just got onto the veranda of this home, of friends of ours, when the wave hit us, and it was up to my shoulders. I could feel myself being pulled. And if Bruce hadn't grabbed me, I'd have gone too.
Struck me chest high. I think you know how tall I am. Well, a bit taller than Mama. She was getting it in her mouth.
Bruce and Louise Graham managed to escape in a friend's boat. But not everyone was so lucky. John Solomon Williams and his wife were washed into the central lagoon.
I was holding on to the floats with my wife, and I told her, hold on tight, won't be long, a wave's gonna hit. And when that wave hit, it was so powerful it just stripped her from my grip. When I came up, I couldn't see anything, it was just white. And then I gave up. That's the truth, I gave up.
John was eventually rescued by Anna and Willie Katoa, who were also separated from their family. Anna was caught outside her house, clutching her 5-year-old daughter, Katerina.
At the time when the wave hit us, I had her in I was holding on to her, and when I surfaced, I didn't have her with me. And we started calling around for Katerina. There was no response, so we thought that we had lost her.
Having lost one daughter, Anna was swept into the lagoon with her husband. He tried to hold on to their other daughter.
just only one big wave, boom, everything blank out. That's where I lost my oldest daughter, about 7 years old. Her name is Maureen.
Anna and Willie Katoa managed to swim to a boat. All they could do was pray.
A lot of our prayers were for ourselves and the families. Prayed for our lost children, hoping that no bad fish will eat them. You know, there'll be somewhere that we'll be able to find them and bury them properly.
In fact, 5-year-old Katerina was rescued by friends, but 7-year-old Maureen was never found. Willie and Anna Katoa and John Solomon Williams were found 2 days later, drifting 30 miles north of Manahiki. Once the cyclone had passed, the island was unrecognizable. Almost all the houses were destroyed, leaving just piles of rubble. A baby and 2 adults were found dead. 20 others were missing, including John Solomon Williams' wife. The islanders will eventually rebuild their homes, but their lives will never be the same again. The psychological effects of these killer storms are hard to come to terms with. When Cyclone Val hit western Samoa in the South Pacific, whole villages were flattened. The tropical vegetation was completely stripped of leaves. For those who survived, it was an experience they will never forget. In 1991, tourist Jeff Matthews made it through Cyclone Val.
I have never been so scared in my life. That's what it boiled down to. The devastation is horrendous. It's as though somebody has gone along with a giant motor mower and taken everything off at about 20 feet.
Jeff was hoping to enjoy a relaxing vacation on Samoa. Instead, he passed the time recording these scenes of awesome power on his video camera.
Basically, for 3 days, you sat in a room with the world flying by at 130 miles an hour. And, well, the first night, I actually, at 4 o'clock in the morning, I packed my kit together and I went into the bathroom of the hotel and sat in the shower because the wind was horrifying. I was terrified. The world progressively over the next 3 days just slowly disintegrated. Just the relief when I got here. I mean, I talked to my wife before and I think back now and I didn't realise how much it's affected me.
Cyclones, hurricanes, and typhoons can leave their mark on people's lives for many years. On Christmas Day, 1974, Cyclone Tracy was the cause of Australia's worst disaster. Before Tracy, there were 12,000 houses in the city of Darwin. After the cyclone, only 3,000 remained. A reporter for the local TV news station was Mike Hayes.
Well, this is my last day in what will probably be known in the future as Old Darwin.
That footage still just tears the guts out of me. It was many years before I was even able to look at it. It wasn't until about 91 I suddenly thought, you've got to pull yourself together and go and look at this stuff because it was an important part of your life. And I did, and it still hits me right between the eyes.
With only a few hours' warning, there was little time to evacuate. Darwin was devastated by 135-mile-per-hour winds.
Roof joists 40 feet long came from out of the sky and through the house and buried themselves a couple of feet into the concrete underneath. Missiles came from everywhere and just assaulted us until first light. And the thing is, we were lucky ones. I mean, our house was holding together fairly well. No one was injured. But this was happening to 45,000 other people at the same time, and most of those were far worse off than we were. People were dying out there. You suddenly realised that the whole place was going to be gone in the morning.
65 people were killed. Thousands more were injured. In the days following the storm, it was every man for himself.
Blokes were coming out of the store with television sets. Next minute, a police car pulled up with two young coppers, and one of whom I knew, and they just said, "Get out the way, Hazy. Keep going." And they took iron bars out of the police vehicle and went in to have a serious conversation with the looters. We came so close to the total breakdown of civilization as we knew it. And to me, that feeling was probably more traumatic than the cyclone itself.
In some parts of the world, people have to cope with the trauma of these killer storms time after time. When Typhoon Angela hit the Philippines in 1995, it was the 14th to strike the islands that year. Swollen rivers burst their banks, and seawater surged through the towns. The death toll was more than 700. Just 1 week before, Typhoon Zack had killed at least 165 people and left thousands homeless. The villagers were evacuated. For one mother and daughter, it nearly cost them their lives. This bag contains their life savings. On some islands, typhoons can trigger flash floods loaded with volcanic ash. In this town, the ash was 10 feet deep. For the residents, it's nothing new.
Every time we experience a mud flow, what we do is just build up on our rooftops. My house is a two-story house, built on my previous two-story house, but the mud flow can still engulf it. This is my second house already.
These people will have to start all over again with whatever they can salvage from the wreckage. Asia is heavily populated. 65% of the population live in coastal areas. India and Bangladesh suffer the greatest loss of life from cyclones. In June 1998, India suffered its worst cyclone in 25 years. It hit the coastal region of Gujarat and flooded the port of Kandla. Hundreds of fishermen and workers from the salt pans were drowned. Over 50,000 homes were damaged. 7 people died when this communications tower fell onto houses below. The final death toll for this cyclone is estimated at over 1,000, the most people to die in a cyclone in recent years. Throughout the world, the poorest people are often the most vulnerable to hurricanes, typhoons, and cyclones. Their homes give them little protection, and they often receive no warning. In America, over 70 million people and their homes are at risk from hurricanes. Coastal areas with a high concentration of buildings and population are particularly vulnerable. When Hurricane Hugo hit South Carolina in September 1989, the damage was estimated at over $7 billion. Hugo was a devastating hurricane which passed just north of Charleston, South Carolina, and killed 60 people. The most costly natural disaster ever was Hurricane Andrew, which struck southern Florida in August 1992. It caused $26 billion worth of damage. 60,000 homes were destroyed. As more and more people move to the coast, the problem of evacuation gets worse. So predicting exactly when and where a hurricane will strike is crucial.
Holy mackerel there!
Bonnie was a huge, dangerous hurricane that threatened the Atlantic coast of America in August '98. For 8 days, Bonnie kept the forecasters guessing as it moved unpredictably and slowly towards the coast. 250,000 people had to be evacuated from their homes. Hurricane Bonnie eventually struck the Carolina coast at Wilmington with winds of 115 miles per hour. A dedicated band of storm chasers recorded the action.
Coming straight at it. 4-inch waves. Water's moderate chop today on US 12.
The sea rose by 10 feet.
All right, the water's starting to come over the road. We got about 6 inches of water.
Once it made landfall, Bonnie stalled and dumped 14 inches of rain in just 48 hours. Bonnie was downgraded to a tropical storm, but then it gathered force again and hit the Virginia coast with hurricane-strength winds. This unpredictable storm caused $1 billion worth of damage and killed 3 people. Just 1 month later, the eyes of America turned to Hurricane George. It hit the Caribbean islands. Then it smashed into Puerto Rico, then Haiti, and then Cuba, leaving a trail of devastation. It killed hundreds, most from the storm surge. For 10 days, it was impossible to tell which part of America it was aiming for. The whole of Florida and the states along the Gulf of Mexico were put on hurricane alert. George passed right over the Florida Keys and headed across the Gulf of Mexico. 1.5 million people were evacuated from New Orleans. It missed the city and made landfall at Biloxi, Mississippi.
Obviously now that it's swung around, we're obviously getting it much worse here than we thought we would.
George dumped over 2 feet of rain on the local area.
There is absolutely no one out. In fact, I haven't even seen a police car.
American casualties. Around the world, millions of people risk living near the coast, often dangerously close to sea level. Sooner or later, they will be caught by the force of the largest storm on Earth. One local captured on video the moment when a river overflowed this bridge. Within hours, the whole area was completely submerged. Deadly torrents of water turned the glamorous resort into a bewildering mess of muddy streets and ruined cars.
When I woke up in the morning, well, I saw what happened. I was in shock. So I went to walk the streets, and the streets were full of sand. There was a lot of water.
Drowning. Hurricane Pauline was the worst hurricane that North or South America had experienced for more than 40 years. 400 people died from drowning. It struck near the Mexican resort of Acapulco. The coast is packed with high-rise, concrete hotels, and the resort is famous for its golden beaches and clear, warm seas. Hurricane Pauline unleashed its fury in October '97, with winds of up to 130 miles per hour. The hurricane missed Acapulco itself, but unleashed torrential rains on the surrounding mountains. "16 inches of rain fell in less than 24 hours. Tons of rainwater rushed down as flash floods.
There was a lot of confusion. Nobody knew what to do. We saw a lot of people in shock walking. We walked and we saw and we didn't like what we see. We were in denial.
It was difficult for the locals to come to terms with their tragedy. Disease and mud were everywhere. The clear-up operation lasted months. Bodies were scattered everywhere, over 400. Many of them were found down by the coast.
The bodies of the people who were found near here were people who lived in the sides of the hill in the mountains. They were washed away by the force of the water and they were brought all the way to this place.
Los ríos
The rivers were so full that they were
on Earth. They can generate winds of over 200 miles per hour, vast quantities of rain, and deadly walls of water. To experience a hurricane is to change your life. These huge storms are born at sea. For a ship's crew, a hurricane is the worst nightmare. But a hurricane really makes its mark when it hits land. Even a moderate-sized hurricane produces the energy equivalent to 8,000 one-megaton bombs. On average, 50 of these killer storms are spawned every year. About 1/3 make landfall. Most people prepare for high winds, but 90% of those who are killed die from drought.
It was like an electric storm, that's how it started. And finally the rain began pouring down, and Lord, what heavy rain. You couldn't walk the streets anymore. It was dangerous to cross because the water was sweeping along stones and rocks. And if one of those rocks had hit you on the foot, it would have broken it and you would have fallen down and the current would have washed you away. That's what happened to some people. It was even dragging along cars.
Aid workers were sent in to help the victims. One of the first to survey the damage was Ron Wormser.
I think the thing that surprised me about the damage was that it did not come from the ocean side, but the hurricane, because of the pattern and the wind swirling, the damage actually came down as the water fell on the foothills, flooded the rivers and streams, and then washed downstream. That's what really washed things out and caused all the damage.
The morning after Pauline hit, all the water and all the sand came down these streets, filled up this roundabout with sand 6 feet high, washed away that video store. No cars could come along. Everything was covered with sand.